Hello, everyone. You are watching OncoInfluencers on OncoDaily, and today it is a profound honor to welcome Dr. Robert Peter Gale, a world-renowned physician-scientist in hematology and immunology. Dr. Gale is perhaps best known for his pivotal role in coordinating the international medical response to the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear disaster, and his career uniquely bridges the frontiers of bone marrow transplantation, crisis medicine, and global health diplomacy. Beyond the headlines, he has served as a trusted advisor and on-the-ground responder in numerous international radiation incidents, working at the intersection of science, politics, and profound human need. Dr. Gale, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
My pleasure.
So to begin at the start, let's go back to your childhood. Were there books or teachers that sparked your curiosity about medicine and science?
I don't think it started in childhood, but when I was in university, I was looking for some area where I could help people. I mean, that was my primary motivation. And it seemed to me that medicine was the most direct route. And in addition, it seemed to me that leukemia was such a dreadful disease that it affected young people, not exclusively. But if one could do something to save some lives of young people with leukemia, that would make my life worthwhile.
So you mentioned about helping people and your desire to help people. So where from this compassion comes? Like, is it your family or community that you learned from, or what do you think? Where is the root?
Well, my father was a stockbroker. I'm not sure if he was helping people or not. But my mother was involved in education. So she was obviously committed to helping young people.
I see. So many people who handle crisis well, people think that they face challenges early in life. And you were in, very critical situations during your career and you needed to make very, fast decisions. Do you think it comes from your childhood or again, it has nothing to do with your childhood?
When we become physicians, we assume that we are able to handle anything and everything. And we also assume that we are immune to adverse events. So, when you're doing something like bone marrow transplants, where you are gambling with people's lives, you are accepting the risks and benefits of doing that. When it goes well, that's great. When it goes badly, well, my philosophy is we didn't give these people leukemia, and we're just trying to help them as best we can. We make judgments. They may be imperfect, but hopefully we operate to the best of our ability.
That's true. So let's move to your adulthood, and your education took you through some of the world's leading institutions, I would say. Was there a project or mentor that you can recall that specifically sparked your interest about hematology and immunology field? Because you were also focused on immunology a lot.
Yes, well, of course, there were many people that influenced me. In medical school, you are assigned as a student to a mentor. My mentor was an Englishman. He had a very precise way of approaching differential diagnosis, and that interested me greatly. I mean, it was a very logical, typically English approach. And he encouraged me to pursue some interesting observations that I made as a medical student that led to my first publication while I was still a medical student. And then, of course, I've had other influences. My PhD advisor was Professor John Fahey, Fahy, from the National Cancer Institute, who came to UCLA. And I would say the other important person was Professor Martin Klein, who came to UCLA from the University of California at San Francisco and was my mentor also at UCLA.
Amazing. It's so important to meet right people and mentors throughout your career. And do you think it's luck or we are choosing our mentors?
Well, it's a combination of things, isn't it? I'm always reminded of my friend, the industrialist Armand Hammer. Armand Hammer said, he made a fortune during the 1920s and 1930s in Russia. And people said, well, you were just lucky you were there during the revolution when the Soviet government was selling off all the things that had been acquired by the Romanovs. And he pointed out, well, there were 70 other million people there, but they didn't do so well. So there's a saying, would you rather be smart or lucky? The best thing is, of course, if you have to choose one, the best thing is to be lucky. But the best thing is to be smart and lucky.
Of course, this is the best combination. If you are smart and lucky, then you are unstoppable, right? So let's go to a very interesting part of your life, the call to go to Chernobyl. Can you give us like brief introduction how that happened? Like out of all physicians, you were chosen to do that, and you became humanitarian medical diplomat basically. And this was not common back then, right?
So first we need some background that I had been going to the Soviet Union since the 1970s, that I was a student of the Soviet nuclear program. So I knew what was going on in the Soviet Union in that context. I also was heavily involved in hematopoietic cell transplants, where we were at the time using very high doses of radiation to do these transplants and then rescue people. And then finally, maybe two things. Number one is I knew Mr. Gorbachev from one prior encounter. And secondly, because of my background, of course, the KGB, the Soviet security agencies, had a very good knowledge of who I was. And so that combination led Mr. Gorbachev. I knew that the Soviets couldn't possibly handle a radiation accident of this magnitude. And so I got a message to Mr. Gorbachev that I was willing to come and help. I was, I must say, somewhat surprised to get a phone call in the middle of the night from the Soviet ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Dubrin, who I also knew, saying that Mr. Gorbachev wanted me to come immediately to Moscow. So that's the background of how this all happened.
And you took a break from your work in US and just went to Russia to help injured people, right?
I took a several-year break because our work extended. There were some immediate medical needs that I worked on with my Soviet colleagues. And then, of course, we had some and continue to have some very long-term follow-up of the consequences of the Chernobyl accident.
And what was the biggest life lesson from this period of your life that you have learned?
I'm not sure that I can say there was a big lesson. Now, in a very specific context, um, we, given the Chernobyl accident, given the Fukushima accident, given some other radiation accidents, for example, in Brazil, my colleagues and I have refined considerably our approach to how we treat uh, these radiological events, and also focusing on prevention, of course. The issue of nuclear terrorism, the issue of the Russian Federation occupation of the largest nuclear power facility in Ukraine. And most recently, my attention has been on the radiation dangers of travel to other planets, the most immediate one of which, of course, is Mars. So I think this is, what all builds together. These spheres dealing with radiation accidents, of course, intersects with what we might expect when astronauts go to Mars and are exposed to the kinds of radiations that we don't experience on Earth. So I've been very fortunate to have all of these experiences.
That's actually very interesting field of research as well. So many unknown, a lot we don't know yet. You saw a lot of human suffering during your career. You worked in different humanitarian settings. After all these experiences, are you optimist or pessimist inside?
I would say that I think to do what I do, to do what we do as oncologists, you must be an optimist, right? How would you go to work every day and give people or expose people to potentially dangerous interventions if you, number one, didn't feel you were benefiting them, and number two, had the impression, perhaps correct, perhaps incorrect, that you are making the best decision you can, given the state of knowledge. It's important to remember, if you save one life, you save all of mankind. That's the Bible.
Dr. Gale, nowadays I'm sure it was hard for you back then as well. What the biggest challenge I think we face as young specialists is work-life balance. How you managed to achieve reasonable, balance because you were so busy. Like looking back at your career.
I was asked on more than one occasion about the issue of work-life balance. And my response is, I'm not familiar with that concept. I'm not looking for work-life balance. I'm looking to save as many lives as I can and not go mountain biking. That's not why I became a doctor, was to have a work-life balance. I became a doctor to help people. So I'm not, I know it's not popular to say this, but I'm not terribly sympathetic to the notion of having work-life balance. It strikes me as a very selfish concept. Society invests an extraordinary amount of effort and an extraordinary amount of monies into producing a physician, and it's a huge investment, and it's also, as physicians, we enjoy a special place in society, a special respect from our fellow citizens. I don't think that goes with the concept of having work-life balance. If you want to have work-life balance, find another job.
I think this works when you are really passionate about what you do. But on the other hand, there is, like, I can tell you as a mother, there is always this guilt that I'm not spending enough time with my children. But on the other hand, I'm very passionate about what I do. And as you mentioned, we became physicians with the purpose to help people. So that's why I hoped to hear, some advice how to manage this situation. But seems there is no option to combine both in a reasonable way.
Well,
Raising
children is an extremely important, maybe the most important thing one can do. But, when society, I have a daughter who is a physician. She has 4 children.
Wow.
And, she, of course, cannot perform to the highest level of what she was trained to do. Because, it's important that she take care of her children. But, we have to put this in a societal context. Women physicians are in a extremely difficult situation. Half of our medical school class at UCLA, more than that, 60%, are females. And they are, on average, much smarter than men. So it's not surprising that they constitute, more than half of the class. But when we do surveys of what happens to them 15 years later, I would estimate that something like 1/2 are not practicing medicine. So, this is a problem. We want to be fair to women physicians, but we also have to consider, as I say, the huge investment that society has made in producing physicians. So I don't have a solution. I mean, if one thing, if we say if push comes to shove, I would have to say, raising children is the most important thing. But should we have 60% of our medical school class as women and then 50% of them not practicing medicine after the age of 30? I'm not sure what the answer is. I don't want to sound male chauvinistic, but it actually operates in my own family. One of my daughters, as I said, I described, and her husband, who's a psychiatrist, works 30 days a week because he says he wants to have a good quality of life. So between the two of them, they're operating at 50% efficiency instead of 100%.
I see. So I never heard about these statistics, actually. That was very, very interesting to know. And I believe this is a separate topic of discussion, a whole separate topic. But
but one thing I should say, if you want to, if you want to try to combine these two important tasks, raising children and practicing medicine, one should probably choose an area of medicine that is more amenable to, that kind of combination. For example, become a dermatologist, become a neurologist, become a, rehabilitation medicine specialist. Don't become an oncologist unless you're willing to put in don't become a neurosurgeon.
Yeah, obviously.
Uh,
Yeah, that's very reasonable. If you want, as you mentioned, work-life balance, then you need to think about that beforehand, before choosing your future profession and specialty. So this is one question I always give to my guests is about one single piece of advice that you would like to share with younger generation of physicians.
well, I think the most important thing is, to do things that you like and to do things that are challenging, and also to have a realistic self-appraisal of your strong and weak points. That's extremely difficult to do. Are you going to be a brilliant laboratory investigator? Are you going to be a very good clinician? Are you going to be in private practice or in the university? When this is perhaps interesting, we get hundreds of applications for fellowships at UCLA. And, of course, we ask the applicants, where do you see yourselves in 10 or 15 years? And, they're being interviewed by a bunch of famous academics. So they all have the same reply. They all say, I see myself at a university seeing patients and doing laboratory research. Because if they don't say that, they're not going to be accepted to the fellowship program. But in this particular experiment, we also interviewed their wives confidentially and simultaneously. And we asked the wives where, of course, this was the time when most of the applicants were men. And we asked the wives, where do you see your husband in 10 to 15 years? And then we waited 15 years and compared what the fellow applicants said and what the wives said. And the wives were much, much more accurate. They said, well, I see us, in a metropolitan area, my husband in private practice, seeing patients. So it's very hard to self-evaluate. But in those days, it was still possible to see patients, do clinical research. And in the afternoon, it was possible to go to the laboratory and do some meaningful research. This is not possible today, right? I mean, you are not going to compete with David Baltimore and 25 postdoctoral students at MIT. That's not going to happen. You've got to choose one or the other. And hopefully you choose the one where your talents lie. Most people, or many people, choose the area where their talents don't lie. They choose the wrong goal. So I guess the advice is self-examination, which is extremely difficult to do. But to take time out to say, where am I talented and where do I have the intellectual capacity to compete and or make a contribution, and where am I not talented? I'm not going to become a brilliant molecular biologist. I better focus on clinical activities, or the contrary. But, I mean, that's my advice. But as I've said, this is not something which is easily done by any human being.
That was amazing advice. Thank you so much, Dr. Gale. But you mentioned that many people, they do wrong decisions. Where from does this come? Why wrong decisions? Is it pressure from society? Some expectations from others? Why they don't follow their patient? What do you think?
Well, I just think this is human nature, right? I mean, everyone thinks that they are among the top 10% of people in being attractive. Nobody is in the other 90%. Everyone thinks that their child is in the top 5% of school. Nobody is in the other 95%. So this is just how human beings operate. And it's not an external pressure. It's an internal and self-deception. And, it's, this has been well described by Tversky and Kahneman. A nice book to read is Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, which points out all of our foibles and all of the heuristics that influence our self-evaluation and which, of course, influence our decisions as physicians. We are constantly making decisions that are irrational because we're influenced by heuristics and something that psychologists call thin slicing, because serious thinking takes a lot of energy. And most people would rather die than think. Most do.
Dr. Gale, thank you so much. There are so many other questions I would like to ask, but I understand that you are very busy, and I think this conversation will really help to our, young researchers, oncologists, clinicians, scientists to think deeper, to, put some work and understand what's their passion and how they should navigate with their own careers. Thank you so much.
Well, I wish you good luck in your studies in Hong Kong.
Thank you.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to OncoDaily on YouTube. Hit the bell icon to stay updated.